Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Pecora here. I hope you had a great weekend. We are going to continue to read I Survived Hurricane Katrina 2005 by Lauren Tarsis. Now, what happened in the last chapter is they were trying to evacuate, and Cleo got sick and she threw up, and then they had to turn around and come back home. So let's see. Oh, hold on 1 second, boys and girls. Let's see what happens in I Survived. Chapter 7. Cleo threw up all day. Barry tried to help keep her calm, but even he couldn't get her to stop crying. Mom managed to talk to their doctor, who had evacuated to Baton Rouge. He said there was a bad flu going around and Cleo wouldn't start to feel better for at least another day. Mom and Dad talked about going to the Superdome, but the newscaster on TV said there were already 10,000 people at the football stadium, with thousands more lined up around the building. "We're hearing there's not enough food or water at the dome," the newscaster said, "and if the power goes off, it's going to be like an oven in there." Then they showed a man who had been turned away because he wanted to bring his little dog with him. "They say no pets," the man said, holding up the dog to the camera. "But I can't leave this guy all by himself." Looking at those crowds on television, Barry was relieved when Mom and Dad decided they were better off at home. Throughout the afternoon, Barry kept his eyes on the sky. By 6 o'clock, the wind had kicked up. The sky turned gray with streaks of silver. But the strangest thing was the silence. Their block was deserted. There were no motorcycles vrooming, no kids laughing and shouting, no... Oops, sorry, boys and girls, missed a page there. No music playing or basketballs bouncing. Usually the trees were filled with birds and frogs chirped from the bushes. But there wasn't a bird in sight, and not a peep was to be heard. And then, around 10 o'clock that night, the wind and rain started for real. Dad and Barry were settled on the living room couch. The baseball playoffs were on, and Dad had set them up with a feast of chips, salsa, and sodas. Mom and Cleo were fast asleep in Mom and Dad's room. The wind moaned at first. Then it started to howl, and finally it was shrieking so loudly Dad had to turn up the TV. Barry moved closer to Dad. Soon there were other noises. Pom, pom, pom. "That's just the rain banging against the metal roof on the shed," Dad said. Kabang! Whoops! A gutter came loose. Ka-ching! There goes part of someone's fence. Dad sat there calmly watching the game, munching on chips. Barry remembered their plane ride to New York the past summer. An hour into the flight, they had flown into a thunderstorm. How that airplane bounced up and down. It felt like a giant hand was dribbling the plane like a basketball. Flashes of lightning exploded in the sky. A woman sitting across from Barry burst into tears. The pilot made everyone sit down, even the stewardesses. The plane rattled so badly, Barry was sure one of the wings would fall off. And in all that commotion, Dad had just sat there reading his book. A few times he patted Barry's leg. "Quite a ride," he said, never taking his eyes from the book. Never once looking outside at the lightning or craning his neck to see the scared expression on the stewardesses' faces. So Barry had kept his eyes glued to Dad's face. As long as Dad was calm, he decided he didn't have to worry. Finally, the bouncing stopped. The plane flew out of the clouds and into the clear blue sky. Later, when they were in a taxi heading into the city, Barry asked Dad how he had stayed so calm. "What were you thinking about?" "Blueberry Hill." Barry gave Dad a funny look. "When I get nervous, I play the song Blueberry Hill in my mind." Barry knew the song. It was a hit by Fats Domino, the most famous citizen of the Lower Nine. Fats had struck it rich singing songs way before Dad was born, but he never moved out of the neighborhood. Barry and Jay loved to walk by his bright yellow house. Sometimes Fats was out on his porch to wave hello. Barry watched Dad now as the wind howled and moaned and shrieked. "Hey, Dad," Barry said, "are you playing Blueberry Hill in your mind?" Dad laughed. He put his arm around Barry and pulled him close. "Nah, I was thinking the wind is making a pretty song." "Sounds like wolves," Barry said. "Nah," Dad said. "Ghosts?" Barry said. "Don't think so," Dad said, listening more closely, tilting his head and half closing his eyes. Dad clicked off the TV. He reached over and grabbed his trumpet, which he always kept nearby. The wind shrieked a high note. Dad put his trumpet to his lips and played along. The wind shifted lower, and so did Dad. He played softly along with the wind until after a while that wind didn't seem so scary and it actually sounded like a song. Not as pretty as Blueberry Hill, but still a song. Barry almost smiled, imagining Cleo's big fat lady in the sky. Not a vampire, but a pretty singer belting out her song. The house shook and rattled, but as Dad's music filled the air, Barry started to feel safe. The lights were bright. Mom and Cleo were cozy in bed. He thought of Gramps patting the walls of the house. In a few hours, the sky would turn blue again. Barry had planned to stay up with Dad to help him keep an eye out for leaks, to watch over Cleo and Mom. But now he felt tired. All the late nights he'd stayed up working on Avico, and all today he'd been so worried about Cleo. Maybe he could take a little rest, cat nap, like Mom did after dinner before she started her hours of baking. Barry closed his eyes, drifting, and then his eyes popped open. It took Barry a minute to understand that he had fallen asleep. The room was dark except for the flickering light of a candle on the corner table. The power must have gone out. He squinted at his watch. 6:35. It was morning. He'd slept for hours. And what had woken him up? A noise. Not the wind, which was shrieking and moaning. Not the rain, which hammered down even harder than when Barry had closed his eyes. No, there was a new noise out there. A kind of whooshing sound. Barry sat up. Dad's coffee mug, half empty, sat on the floor. Where was Dad? Was Cleo okay? And what was that strange noise that had woken Barry up? Barry heard Dad's footsteps upstairs. He stood up, but before he could take 2 steps, the front door flew open. A wave of water swept into the house. It swirled around Barry's legs, knocking him off his feet. There was a scream, but this time it wasn't the wind. It was Barry. Chapter 8. Barry! Barry! Dad was pounding down the stairs. He splashed through the water, grabbed Barry by the arm, lifting him up, and pulled him toward the staircase. Furniture and other objects floated around them like bath toys. The new couch Mom had saved a year to buy, the little square lamp table where Gramps used to play chess, framed pictures of Barry and Cleo from school. The water was rising fast. It was up to Barry's waist by the time they reached the stairs, and it kept getting higher. It was like their house was a bucket being filled by the biggest hose in the world. Where was all this water coming from? The water in Gramps' stories hadn't been this wild. Mom burst out of her room with Cleo in her arms as Dad and Barry made it to the top of the staircase. She looked down the stairs and gasped. She wrapped her free arm around Barry, pulling him close. The levee, Roddy, she said to Dad. The levee broke? Barry asked, picturing the industrial canal. The canal was 5 miles long and very deep. Was all that water pouring into their neighborhood? Mom and Dad seemed frozen, staring at the rising water. Panic boiled up inside of Barry. What will happen? Barry asked. What will we do? What? His voice trailed off. He wasn't even sure he wanted to know the answers to his questions. They all stood there, huddled together, watching the water move up the stairs. We need to go to the attic, Dad said. Now. Dad pulled open the hatch in the ceiling, and a blast of hot air came down. Barry had been up there only once in his life. It was a tiny space, dark and hot like an oven, with a ceiling that sloped down so you couldn't stand up straight. Cleo started to cry. No! She yelled. She tried to run away. No, go up! Dad caught her. Cleo, he said. She struggled to escape, screaming and squirming. There was no way they could force her up the rickety stairs. It's all right, Barry said, taking hold of his sister's hand. No, she insisted. Cleo, he said, working hard to keep his voice steady. Avico might be up there. Cleo sniffed. She let Barry pick her up and put her arms around his neck. She buried her head in his chest. She still felt feverish. He held her more tightly. Dad sent Mom up first. Then Barry put Cleo on the ladder and climbed up right behind her. Dad came up last, and they all sat down together in the darkness. There was barely enough room for the 4 of them, and they were squashed together. The air was so hot it burned Barry's lungs. It stunk like mildew and dust. He tried not to imagine what was happening just below the attic floor. Every single thing they owned, their furniture, Cleo's toys, Mom's cookbooks, Dad's trumpet, all his music being covered with water. And Avico. He was trapped in Barry's room somewhere. Lost. For the past few weeks, thinking about Avico had given Barry the feeling, a secret, happy feeling, that maybe he really wasn't the scared little kid he saw in the bathroom mirror. He and Jay had created something unique, something special. Somehow, the bright colors of Barry's drawing seemed to have gotten inside him. All right, boys and girls, we're going to stop there for today. Stay tuned for tomorrow so we can see what's going on.